Welcome back to Trending in Education. Mike Palmer here. Very happy to be joined by Sean Darcy, who's the head of Kahoot at school and home. Kahoot's a software that I've had some direct experience with in my career at Kaplan, and it was a pretty interesting software. I've enjoyed it also as a participant at live events. It's pretty interesting stuff. They're always making new connections. We're going to talk a little bit about some of that. And they deliver a really interesting solution to students, teachers, parents, people in the corporate sector. They do all sorts of things. But Sean, let's dispense with the amenities. Welcome to Trending in Education.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
Yeah. So you have a great software product that you're responsible for bringing it to homes and schools. We're going to want to dive into all that. But before we do that, I always like to get to know our guests a little bit better by hearing their origin stories. What got you to this point in your career, and how does that connect to the world of learning?
Thanks, Michael. I'm Canadian, born in Ottawa, Canada, but now I live in Oslo, Norway with my family. So no escaping the snow for me. I've been living in Norway now for around 15 years, looking more and more like I'm here for good.
Yeah.
I've been working with technology for pretty much my entire career, flipping between sort of marketing, product, and commercial roles. I think while here in Norway, I've spent a good chunk of my time at a company called Opera Software, who makes a pretty, not so well known in the West, but certainly well known in developing markets. They make a web browser for mobile phones, which is really popular in Asia and in Africa and those kinds of places.
I think people like myself who have looked at web analytics are familiar with a percentage that is Opera browsers. Yes.
It's a niche product in the West, but in places like in Africa, it's like the number one web browser. It still is, actually.
Interesting.
And so I cut my teeth on technology and developing markets, traveled a lot during that time. One of the things I really enjoyed about working in technology is how it could democratize, especially for young people. So that's a theme through my career, is how can I help use technology to help democratize. I got interested in the education sector around 2013. We did a partnership with an organization called World Reader. Basically, what they do is they make books and literature, so full Charles Dickens books, everything you can imagine. They just make that available for free for consumption on small screens in Africa. And yeah, it's a pretty noble cause, and we helped deliver that. And that was quite inspiring. The kids would, instead of spending their time, wasting their time looking at different social media, they would sit and they would read like War and Peace. So it was pretty incredible. The data, the stats behind that. It's awesome.
Yeah.
And I think, so that was really my inspiration to dig more into education. And I got the amazing opportunity to join Kahoot back in 2016 to head up the marketing team.
Yep.
And that was really interesting because Kahoot was growing pretty darn well without a lot of marketing. It was pretty much a viral machine at that point. It still is, actually.
Yeah.
But there was a lot to do around supporting the community and making sure they had what they needed to use the product.
Yeah.
And I was really drawn to the mission, making learning awesome. It really resonated with me.
Yeah.
It's pretty big, pretty broad.
Yeah, I mean, and people may not know this by listening, but there's an exclamation point after Kahoot. So it's not just Kahoot, it's Kahoot. You're making it awesome. Yeah,
exactly. Kahoot. Yeah, you gotta really say it. Yeah, and so I've been working there for a few years now, and more recently I've taken up the head of the Kahoot at school, and only a few weeks ago the Kahoot also at home sides of the businesses. Yeah, looking forward to continuing the growth and making learning awesome for those two segments.
Yeah. And those two segments in 2020 are increasingly interoperable. School has moved home in a lot of ways, and that's had to have been a very challenging year. Obviously, it was a challenging year for all of us on multiple fronts. Actually, before we do that, in case anyone doesn't know what Kahoot is, can you give us a little more context around what it is and how it came into being?
Yeah, sure. Kahoot is a game-based learning platform. We call these learning games Kahoots. At the most basic, Kahoots are just quizzes, but of course you can build those up. You can add a lot of different questions to those to make them more robust. I think, as we were talking about earlier, Kahoot's a bit like the intersection of learning and entertainment.
Hmm.
So people have actually called us like the YouTube of learning games, or even the Netflix of your learning games,
Nice.
because we're just, yeah. So that's a nice compliment.
And conversely, called YouTube the Kahoot of online video platforms, right?
That's, yeah. Maybe in the next 5 years, that'll be what they'll
Nice.
say. Yeah,
Yeah.
that'll be fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we really cater to a bunch of different user groups. It's quite versatile, so you can use it across different audiences. So I think the biggest audience we have is schools,
Yep.
teachers, and students.
And it's very portable across platforms, is my recollection too. Like it's easy. You could
Yeah.
use it on your phone. You could, if you're on a desktop or laptop. So it's pretty portable, and it works in all the different contexts for a quizzing game, which is no small task. And then on top of that, it's done in a way that is sticky and
Mm.
engaging. And because playing to this audience, this is the whatever segment of your life development, the group who's too cool for school. They have to actually say, I'm too cool for school, but this Kahoot, I can hang with Kahoots because Kahoots are fun. And I'm sure it's not 100% slam dunk, but it seems like you're navigating that audience pretty effectively. For folks who are listening, if you haven't tried it, it's fun. Kahoot, you got to play with it a little bit to get a feel for it. But I could understand why it began with viral marketing first, because I think you play with it like a lot of good gamified
Mm.
trivia stuff. It has that kind of sticky feel to it, and in a good way. And it's been around in learning for a long time. That's been the lane
Yeah.
that it's been operating in the whole time.
Yeah, it's strange. We've been around since 2013, so we're like the elders of EdTech, so to speak.
Yeah.
We've been around so we've built up a pretty big following. We have
Yeah.
7 million teachers that are using Kahoots.
Mm.
They're using it to create, of course, the games themselves, but they're
Yeah.
also using it for formative assessment.
Yeah.
And also just inside schools and inside districts, they're using it for professional development. That's a fun
Yeah.
way for educators to get together and learn from each other.
And that was the
Uh,
context that I got to know it in a little more on the enterprise side, but make your town hall more entertaining by adding some interactive elements to it. And it works in that context too. So the software is pretty flexible. If you just want to add a little more engagement from your audience, beyond just being able to raise their hand or walk up to a microphone, there's a richer level of engagement, both to a live audience and to these things can be async too. So you can set up a quiz and kids are competing against each other. Can you talk through some of the ways in which it's used?
yeah, you're mentioning like the more corporate side. So I think that's an interesting area. So it's a little known fact, because of course everybody knows Kahoot for being more around in schools, playing for
Hmm.
teachers and students, but
Yeah.
it's also used by 97% of the Fortune 500. They're using
Wow.
Kahoot.
Hmm.
Yeah, so they're using it for building corporate culture.
Yeah.
They're using it to make meetings more
Right.
interesting, and we'll get to it in a minute. On this sort of COVID climate, meetings are virtual and not that fun. So Kahoot certainly is helping in that department.
Yeah, when we were setting up, I was mentioning how it reminds me a little bit of Slack for a younger generation, a bit in terms of the UI and the experience. And Slack's another thing that's made the remote life for people who are using that software engaging, as the community features are there. You can connect with other people at a time when everybody's feeling very disconnected. Is Kahoot performing a similar function? That's been my experience, at least when I've used it. It's like you do feel a little more connected to a bigger tribe when you're engaging in these games together.
Yeah, that's definitely engineered into the product, and that was really, we call it, social learning. We call it the
Yeah.
sort of campfire moment where people
Hmm.
would come together and they would tell stories and play games together, and that's all part of the magic that is Kahoot, is this
Yeah.
sort of
Yeah.
social interaction and also that fun competitive nature of Kahoot,
Yeah.
with the
And
leaderboard and
yeah, and the
you know
names, because the clever naming of the players is very entertaining. Is that
Yeah, so when you're joining a game, we have something called a lobby screen, which is, as you can imagine, it's the lobby for the game.
yeah.
You're ready to go in. You have to give yourself a nickname in the spirit of gaming. And that's one of the ways I think all players really love Kahoot, because, of course, they can get quite creative with those names.
Yeah.
The students in particular, because a lot of those names are memes in themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's like how to keep things fresh. Every time you play a new game at Kahoot, part of the fun is to see what kind of crazy new and creative nicknames that kids and big kids will come up with.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, so check it out. And if folks want to learn more or want to see what this is all about, where should they go?
Kahoot.com. Yep.
Kahoot, no exclamation point,
Yeah,
dot
.com.
com. And yeah, I'll personally attest that can enrich and enliven what might be a bit of a drier experience. I have been known to have been a teacher in my day. I wasn't always 100% engaging, and I could use a little more interactive tooling in the classroom, and Kahoot really can help with that. And pulling back to the conversation about this year, our teachers are in many ways our front lines
Mm.
now, and it's a very difficult year for them, and they do need help. So I was drawn to thinking about them this year, and then at the same time thinking about students and families, anything to just make this remote experience less boring. As simple as it's saying, that does seem like something that Kahoot is focused on, does a nice job with. How has this year played out for you?
Yeah, what a year. Before COVID ever hit, we had a lot of wind in our sails. We were growing pretty quick. And then, of course, COVID hit. And then what we saw was all the educators that were out there that were already using Kahoot, of course, needed some quick solutions around, oh no, now my class has gone virtual. How am I possibly going to engage my students?
Mhm.
Because, of course, student engagement, virtual student engagement is like 100 times more difficult.
Yeah.
How do you keep the kids to keep their video on? It's really difficult. We certainly rode that throughout the entire year, is that more and more educators turned to Kahoot to help them out. And we just opened up our platform. Of course, we have a free product, which is awesome. And then we have, of course, some additional functionality with a premium product. We just opened that up this year. Just said, "Hey, this is tough. Let's work together." So we just opened it up, and a lot of people embraced that and got to work. So of course, that was great to see.
Yeah.
So I think some of the things we saw, of course, the video call has been the new classroom. So we work with Zoom. We're working with Zoom now, and we're working
Hmm.
with the other video providers out there to try to do
Yeah.
integrations. We also saw that the asynchronous gameplay. So we're famous for the live kind of
Yeah.
game show,
Hmm.
but we just launched a new game mode called Challenge
Yeah.
back in for schools. It was launched in January.
Hmm.
That was an instant hit, I think, because of course then who could be assigned to students to play on their own time, still having it that fun gamified element. All of
Yeah.
that.
And that's huge, particularly this year. Anything that can be flexible, portable enough to fit into the little windows of time in our
Mhm.
days is huge. And if that can be competing on the same playing field with maybe a mobile game, just like I might
Yeah,
hop in and play, I was going to say Candy Crush, but that's showing how out of touch I am with whatever the latest game trends are. But it's similar. It's a similar context. It's and as someone who, for me, showing my age, I grew up as a kid. I would try to do the New York Times crossword puzzle, and over the course of the week, it would get harder. And
yeah,
as I got smarter, I tried to make it to Tuesday and Wednesday, and I'm still landing around Thursday these days. But I remember that being fun because I knew I was learning, but it also felt like a game. And
mm,
that's, to me, what I think is really interesting about Kahoot. Are there any stories from the year, just in terms of how people are using it, that are maybe inspirational or good ideas for folks who might be listening if they want to think about how to add a little more life or energy
yeah.
to what they're delivering?
We touched on the blending of home and school
Hmm.
and the community at large. Really, we've seen some of our teachers out there, some of our ambassadors in particular, have not only use Kahoot inside the classroom, but they've actually taken it out to the entire school.
Yeah.
And then from beyond the school, they're actually now playing games with the wider community, so with
Hmm.
parents.
Hmm.
And it's been a really interesting way to bridge that sort of classroom, what's of course quite difficult, and then bring it into the home
Yeah.
and engage a family around some of the same questions, right?
Yeah.
So that famous show, what is it? Are you smarter than a fifth grader? A bit like those things
Yeah.
happening all over the world, but especially in the US, we've seen
Right.
that happen. So
Right.
that kind of stuff, that was a bit of a surprise for myself. I didn't think
Hmm.
that would happen.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
again, educators are incredibly innovative when they can find new technologies and figure out new ways to make the most of it. So I
Yeah.
think that was
Yeah.
an interesting one.
Yeah, for sure. And we're all probably battling boredom and anxiety maybe more than we've ever done before this year, especially when you're trying to learn, because learning is competing with things that are more fun generally.
Mm.
So if you can add a little bit of sugar with your medicine, so to speak, it is an interesting approach. I also saw, staying on trend, we like to talk about what's emerging. I did see that you recently partnered with Bitmoji, which
Yeah.
is an interesting, again, for folks who want to stay hip with the kids today. It's they got their Kahoots hooking up with their Bitmojis. So in case folks don't know what a Bitmoji is, can you explain for us what Bitmoji is and how Kahoot connected to them?
Yeah, so Bitmoji is really an online avatar that is probably most famously used in Snap or
Mhm.
Snapchat, as it
Yeah,
formerly was called.
right.
And then as a user, you can create your likeness as an avatar. And what's cool about it is that it will adapt to different situations based on emotional reactions or whatnot
Yeah,
without you having to recreate your avatar. Just the system does it. It's probably the best implementation of an avatar so far out there
yeah,
online.
yeah.
Educators wanting to do everything they could to engage their students who were, by the way, already fascinated with
Yeah,
Bitmojis long before COVID,
for sure.
started to create these virtual classrooms or Bitmoji classrooms where it looked like a collage of a fake classroom or the virtual version of the classroom, which they would start lessons with their avatar, their Bitmoji avatar likeness.
Yeah,
And that was just sort of a fun and personal way to kick off lessons with their students.
yeah.
And of course, we have avatars on our platform, but I'm sure you have a lot of different online profiles out there. Do you add an avatar to all of them? No. So
Yeah,
it made sense for us to work with Bitmoji because they do the best.
I've played with them a little bit. They're fun. Full disclosure, I've done a more than one show on emojis and learning over the years. So I am
Okay.
fascinated by just the pictorial language element of emojis, and then Bitmojis are your avatar as an emoji, kind of
Yeah,
is
exactly.
is a way to think about
Okay.
it. But then uh, Kahoot is almost like a context for your Bitmojis to hang out in, which is like why it's interesting. It reminds me a little bit of Second Life way
Yeah.
back in the day, which was a little weird because I think Second Life was you were trying to actually be you, or it just didn't feel right. The technology maybe wasn't right now, but what I like about what Bitmoji's doing, I feel like Kahoot has a similar look and feel, is that it feels cartoony and fun so that there's like a playful element to the experience, and then that context is really just tied to while you're playing the game. So I could see how that would really connect. And then taking a step back, try to quote Marshall McLuhan at least one out of every three shows. So like the medium, and it's the same quote all the time. It's
Ah,
the medium is the message. But if you can bring this to your students, to your events that you're running or whatever, I think it does say something about you, and it says something about the audience that's engaging. So I do think there's something really to the approach that Kahoot is taking. I'd love to get more of your perspective on that.
like I said, we know about our educators using Bitmojis for years. We
Mhm.
had the Bitmoji classroom trend, which was everywhere all through COVID.
Yeah.
And then we had actually had Snap as a customer.
Mm.
So what happened was basically we brainstormed a bit and we came up with this idea to use Bitmoji for avatars, and then we pitched it to Snap via our account team,
Yeah.
and they loved it. And we had a prototype in front of them in a week,
That's awesome.
and then we shipped it out in a month. So
Hmm.
I think part of the thing with Kahoot, we move very quick.
Yeah.
So this was a really good opportunity, and we got this out during the kind of
Yeah.
back to school period when teachers really needed that extra boost in engagement.
That's awesome. Yeah. And yeah, you mentioned access before. That's the other big part of the story of 2020 and learning is identifying that there are these access gaps and that some kids aren't as equipped as others
Mm.
to engage in digital learning and the next generation of what's happening, at least until we're out of the quarantining and learning from home kind of phase of the COVID response. How has the access story related to what Kahoot is doing either this year or just in general?
Yeah, it's something we're definitely worried about as well. This whole digital divide issue that persists. One of the things about Kahoot, which makes it almost like the lowest common denominator of EdTech, is that it just works on any device
Mhm.
and it doesn't require a lot of bandwidth. So you don't
Right,
necessarily need to have like super high speed fiber or anything like that.
right,
And then this year, again, we launched this challenge mode,
mhm,
which therefore eliminated the need for two screens
right,
because in a live classroom you would need to have a shared big screen and then you would
right,
need to have your own Chromebook or
mhm,
mobile phone or something. So this new challenge mode became okay, then you only need that one screen. So
right.
I guess that's been the only thing, is if as long as the student has a screen at home with some basic internet, it would work.
Yeah,
But yeah, it is a problem and it's something that definitely we're trying to look at and take more seriously. I think the
yeah,
other thing that we spent a bit of time on this year was, if you ask district leaders in the US in particular, what do they care about? They're probably saying it's not just academic or are the kids
yes,
learning. They
mhm,
are, what's their mental state right now?
yes,
What are the kids? What do they feel?
mhm,
So we spent a great deal of time building up our social emotional learning collections,
yeah,
and they're all free. You can just
mhm,
access them and play them. So because we really felt that this is actually going to be something that's going to be a bigger issue going into the fall.
yeah, yeah, makes
Um,
sense.
'Cause it's
Yeah, and
tough, you know. I mean, it's not just the teachers who are struggling, and the kids themselves are having a hard
yeah.
time with this.
Yeah, that's why I always am looking for fun ways to escape a little. And if you can engage in a little bit of escapism while also bettering yourself, I don't think those things are frequently they're thought of as mutually exclusive. And I think that's more just maybe bad education rather than if you actually can bring more of the fun into it, at least as part of your repertoire and the competitive aspect of it too, and in a way that is sensitive to the negative dynamics of being too competitive. So I think
Yep.
that is another tricky component, but so far so good it seems. And yeah, as we're rounding the turn here, Sean, we typically like to look ahead a little bit. It is a trend spotting show. First, looking ahead for Kahoot, and then maybe getting some of your personal perspective on what's capturing your imagination is usually how we like to
Yep.
close. But first for Kahoot, what's on the horizon? What do you see in the next couple years as we maybe hopefully power through the pandemic, and then the world's probably different in the new normal that emerges on the
Mm.
other side. But how is Kahoot thinking about the future?
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of studies out there already around how remote is not going to go away
Hmm.
after the pandemic. It's going
Yeah,
to persist. So I think across our school, like, look at higher ed. I think higher ed's a good example. You mentioned at the beginning. I think a lot of higher ed will become more and more remote, or some
yep,
of it will be remote, do some kind of hybrid. Their tools like Kahoot will certainly help on that engagement, also help with basic things like attendance. Did you show up or not? So I think that's happening. Also, the learning at home for us, we started with this back in, okay, May, where we started to build up new study tools or homework helpers for students. So we covered off the kind of basic ones like flashcards
yep,
and the ones that are some of our competitors out there do. But now we moved into some newer, more social types of learning. We have this thing called study leagues, where a group of students get together. They can either create or find Kahoots, and we have 100 million mostly
wow,
teacher made Kahoots available. So you can just find some really good Kahoots, load them into your study league, and then you can have fun together while learning and compete.
cool.
And there's like a scoreboard and
Yeah.
hopefully some banter and all of that
Well,
stuff.
it almost reminds me of the esports
Yeah,
gaming
yeah,
kind
yeah,
of
yeah, yeah.
vibe, you
Where
know?
that's a really good, yeah. It's something like in that lane where it's competitive, but it's fun and it's learning
Yeah.
and it's student driven. I think that's the point.
What ages are using this? Does it depend on the teacher? How does that work?
Yeah, I think our sweet spot's around grade 6, 7, 8
Okay.
in there, but it's used obviously by learners of
Yeah.
any age, really. But I think this last year we really worked hard on making it easier for younger kids to use the platform.
Mhm.
So we have like images as answers. So if you can't read, you can.
Cool.
Yeah. So we've done some things that are hopefully going to make it a little bit easier for younger kids.
Nice.
Also, if you want to be able to turn off the scoreboards, kids
Mhm.
get freaked out if yeah. So for adults and kids in junior high, it's fine, but
Yeah.
younger kids might not want that.
And
So
also,
we give options.
yeah, and parents of younger kids may lose their minds if they see their kids' leaderboards, which is a
Yeah,
whole nother,
exactly.
that's an entirely different conversation.
We give teachers all those sort of
Finer
options, I think.
controls. Yeah, that makes sense.
Student study tools is really an area of focus for us. And also going back to how Kahoot started, the original intention for Kahoot was to be a student-led learning platform. We had a pedagogy called Learners to Leaders, where the idea was that the students themselves would be creating all of the Kahoots and learning games, demonstrating their learning, sharing that with their peers, getting everyone excited about their topic areas.
Yeah.
Over the last
Yeah.
few years, it's been tough to do that, but I think we're getting closer and closer. I mean, there are a lot of students out there making Kahoots. It's not that. It's just that for them to actually be the top group that's actually making Kahoots is going to be, I think, where we're moving.
Yeah,
towards.
I could see how you'd have to start with the educators. That's very cool stuff. So as we're wrapping up, Sean, I always love to ask our guests what's capturing their imagination as someone who's been around the world, worn multiple hats, played different roles, and tried to stay out ahead of things. What's capturing your imagination these days? Anything you want to make sure we stay on the lookout for?
What I'm looking forward to in 2021 is what we can do with some of the cool content that we're creating on the platform. I think that we started off by saying the intersection of entertainment and education.
Some call it edutainment.
I'm not going to do that,
yeah,
Michael.
Yeah,
I'm not going to do that. I think that's overused, but I'll call it the long-winded version, the intersection of education.
For a while, I was trying to call it entercation. And that was just not taking off either. So we'll continue to workshop it. But yeah.
Yeah, and I'm excited. We have some really interesting partners that we're working with. So for example, tomorrow we have the UN Human Rights Day. So we work with the United Nations, and I think we can make a difference for a lot of people using or working with some of these big partners around the world.
Yeah.
And we've created a really nice proposition around this called Kahoot Academy, which hopefully we'll see more from in the next year.
Awesome.
So yeah, I'm excited about that. And I'm also excited about growth outside of the US, Canada, and Western Europe. So we're seeing that happen.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned Africa as part of your experience. Are there any global aspects to Kahoot that you're interested in?
Yeah, we're seeing really good growth in LATAM, and that's probably partly to do with the fact that we were so big in the US, and the US is certainly a huge influence over LATAM. So we're trying to adapt our product to LATAM right now, but yeah, definitely the world's our oyster, and we're trying to build up our offerings around the world. So excited to see where that takes us.
Awesome. Plenty of pearls out there to be had, and pearls of wisdom. I don't know where I'm going to go with this, but Sean, it was wonderful having you on the show. Thanks so much for joining.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and for our listeners, check out Kahoot. It's really an interesting platform, and if you like what you're hearing, tell your friends. This is Trending in Education. We'll be back again soon.